Thank you very much, Christina, for the introduction. We are in different part of the world, so as Christina said, very good early morning for me in Hong Kong, a little bit late for Tony in Australia. And some of you are in the morning and in late afternoon or evening. I can see some familiar face, and that makes us feel very good. We are together. I'm going to share the screen, and there's some technical procedure. I'm going to share the screen and allow Tony to control the slide as well. So bear with us for a moment. We're going to share our screen now. Okay. And several more clicks before we continue. Okay. I have to give Tony the.
I'm okay.
Permission. Tony, are you all right?
Yes. Yeah, I've got control as well.
Okay, that's good. Things are under control. So basically, we called it just and favorable conditions of work, the leisure dimension. This is to bring, as we say, the leisure dimension into issues related to the work. And let me see. Okay. Things are not moving on my side for some reason. Okay. The content of our presentation, we basically have several items. We're going to prop up by asking some initial questions. Some of you I can see familiar faces are from the leisure field, but some may not be. Just some initial questions to get the understanding and break the ice here. Then we'll follow up with the right to leisure time and culture and the United Nations Human Rights System. We're going to link it with the agenda of 2030, the sustainable development. And of course, in this important presentation, we will take you through the Charter for Leisure. And there will be also a QR code for you to go later on your free time and read and maybe make some comments as well. We'll share with you the World Leisure Organization Human Rights group that Tony and me are leading, and call for your participation. And then we summarize, and then we have another discussion questions. So let's just start with the just an overview. World Leisure Organization has a consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. The organization published the Charter for Leisure back in the 1970s. The Charter was revised since then twice, and then it recently was revised and published in 2021. It was a 2 years intensive work. Tony and me were the convener of a task force, which comprised people from the World Leisure Academy of the World Leisure Organization and other individuals and the associations, and mostly academic, but also practitioners. So it was revised then, and it was a long process, very productive, and World Leisure Organization Board has basically approved it in 2021. So we represent the World Leisure Organization Leisure and Human Rights Group, which is developing and promoting the Charter. So we are very privileged to have this stage to continue to do this job. And I will hand it over now to Tony.
Okay. I thought we were going to do the discussion questions, Atara.
Yes. All right. You're right. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. But it's not moving yet, so we need to have some. I have no idea why it is. Okay. Here we go. So okay, we just move on. Yeah. Initial discussion questions. We did some rehearsal, but I missed this point. So we have the 3 discussion questions that seems very trivial to some of you, but we want you to think about it and maybe give us responses. For these questions, I will hand over to the World Leisure Secretariat to use the Padlet for getting these responses. So Christina or Maya, I'll stop sharing and allow you to take on. Okay, thanks. So in these questions, you can key your responses and don't write too much. This is not a PhD thesis, neither a master one, just some ideas to get the notions of what's going on among colleagues here.
Fun, that's good. Are we meant to be seeing all the questions that come up, Christina?
Yeah, there are 3 questions here. When you hear the word leisure, what things come to your mind? What is the difference between leisure and work for you, and what else is important in life? So activity which is done in free time for enjoyment, people say fun. Important elements apart from work and leisure is friends, family. People talk about art and culture, nature. Tony, do you see the responses?
Yes, yeah.
Great. I'm just reading out loud. Non-structured play.
Yeah.
Okay, leisure is always what I do freely. Perfect. Okay, we just give enjoy being your true self. Thank you. Joy doing things that we enjoy, replenish us. Okay, I see work as leisure. Good for you. Wonderful. Connecting with people I care about, family and friends. Okay, time, on decision to participate in activities. We just give about maybe 1 minute for people to go in. Health, loved ones. Okay. Love. Health. Great. Family relationship, being a good citizen. So I can see that there are different circles, starting from the self to the family, friends, and citizenship and peace to the global level. Wonderful. Freedom. Okay. So I think we can come back now to our own presentation. Well, thank you for your great input. We go back. This is, as I said, part of our presentation. We need to do this and call Tony back. Tony, are you back?
Yes, it says I can control Atara's screen. Right.
Yes. Good.
Okay. So if I click, I will get my.
Perfect.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you. Good evening, everybody. And very pleased to be joining this this session and to have you all on board. And I think that little period of exchange, if nothing else, indicated the wide range of human experience and involvement that leisure involves. The first section of the presentation, then, we'd like to introduce the idea, especially to those of you who are not part of, as it were, the leisure leisure community, introduced the very concept of leisure, time, and culture as a human right. And this may not be familiar to everybody, so it will, for some of you it'll be very familiar. But I will just go through the basics, as it were. And I'm trying to, here we are, getting the headings to come up. The leisure time and cultural activity are human rights in the sense that they have been declared so by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948. And it's even more than that in a way, because as a result of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, which is an international treaty which deals with the economic, social and cultural rights part of the Universal Declaration, there are specific rights in 2 of the articles of that covenant. And the first is Article 7, which declares the right to just and favourable conditions of work, including rest, leisure, and reasonable limitations of working hours and periodic holidays with pay. And that's all it says on the leisure aspect of the conditions of work, so the just and favourable conditions of work. But you can see it's stated there that the obverse, if you like, of work time, meaning family time, leisure time, cultural time, is declared as a right. And some of this is overseen by the International Labour Organization, and some of it through the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And we've latched on to the latter institution to do our work from the point of view of leisure. So Article 7 is really related to people in employment, and Article 15 looks more broadly at cultural life, and it declares as a right the right to take part in the cultural life of the community. Now, culture is a term used in the Charter, extensive in the Charter and in the International Covenant very extensively. And there's not time to go into it now, but the International Covenant and the Universal Declaration don't define these terms, but UNESCO and other organizations have done so. And what we find is that the word culture is a very broad concept, as everybody knows, and includes more than just the leisure, but it does cover the whole of leisure, but it also includes other things like language and self-determination and that sort of thing of cultures. So the remit of the World Leisure Organization therefore aligns very closely with these 2 articles of the International Covenant. And it's the task of the World Leisure Organization and its charter and the work that we're doing as the Leisure and Human Rights Group to, as it were, expand on this concept and develop it and promote it. Now, I'm still getting used to this intercontinental technology that we're trying to operate here.
And you're doing great. No worry.
Good.
Well done.
Right. So to reiterate then, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights is a treaty in international law. Now that's particularly important because it means that whereas the Universal Declaration is really a statement of principle and aspiration and intention, as it were, the covenant is actually a treaty. And we are all familiar these days with United Nations treaties and the way they're monitored by the phenomenon of climate change, which attracts a great deal of publicity. But this treaty, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, is also a treaty in the same way and has the same formal status within the United Nations, and member countries can ratify it. That is, that their legislatures actually agree that member states will abide by the provisions of the covenant. And 171 UN member states have so ratified the International Covenant. And this means that they are committed to uphold all the covenant rights. And this includes the leisure rights. So 171 countries of the members of the United Nations have undertaken to uphold these leisure rights. As with the climate change thing which we see so much publicity about, this compliance, or the extent to which they are doing their job and fulfilling their promise to uphold these rights, is monitored. Compliance is monitored by a committee of the United Nations. And this is done by periodic reports to the UN committee, and by which outlines the policy measures that nations, member states have undertaken and the outcomes. And this is done about every 5 years with in this reporting process. And the relevant committee receives the reports from the member states. It comments on them and asks for more information and so on. And then this is responded to by the member states. And then the committee gives its final observations on that round of reporting. And this process has been going on since the 1970s. And not all the member states have ratified from the 70s. Some have joined later or ratified later. But there's a huge body of material which is all online and which is available for inspection, research, investigation, and interrogation. So this is what we've, as a result of the work we've been doing, have sort of focused in on in our work. The fact that this process is going on, and we can, as an NGO, we can take part in it. So that's the introduction to the place of leisure in the United Nations human rights system. Now, I want to also then make a connection. I'm trying to change the screen, and it takes a bit of a. It's not going to. It doesn't want to play. Ah, right, here we are. So we also need to make a link between human rights and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which is the backdrop to this the overall conference. And so we need, therefore, to make a link between leisure and development, and the way they tie up. Now, so our position is that development, as well as economic development, also includes social and cultural rights, and this appears in a number of documents, including the Agenda 2030 documents, which actually make this link, and they mention not just economic but social and cultural rights as well. So we latch on to, as it were, that aspect of the work on the 2030 agenda. To try and make that link clearer, if we consider development in the sense of economic development as the backdrop to all forms of development, social and economic. And we can look at the developed economies that have successfully had a massive period of growth and development in the 20th century. What happened to them in the Europe, North America, and so on? What happened? Well, GDP per capita expanded by 300%, threefold increase in GDP per capita. But at the same time, weekly working hours fell by 40%. So part of the dividend, if you like, of economic development is not just GDP, but it's also reduction in working hours. And part of that reduction in working hours translates into leisure. Now, it's not being suggested that that process is easy or was easy for those countries that made that leap in that period. It was uneven, evolved in struggle and negotiation. And along the way, of course, there were 2 world wars and a Great Depression. But nevertheless, in terms of development taking place, that's what took place, and that's what we're talking about, as it were, in current discourse on development. And I'm sorry for the pauses. I'm still having difficulty making the screen move on. That's right. So reduced working hours is part of the dividend of economic development, and part of the dividend, therefore, is time for rest, time for leisure, time for family, time for community. So we see leisure and our field of responsibility, if you like, in the World Leisure Organization as being part of and part of the dividend of development, and therefore highly relevant to the agenda. Now, if we move on to the 2030 agenda, is he trying to get the technology to move on? Here we are. This has 17 indicators, and I will put up the screen in a moment, but in which culture and leisure are not explicitly included, unfortunately. But we know the Agenda 2030 is an enormous agenda, and perhaps some of these things are understandable when the priorities had to be sorted out. However, UNESCO have become muted for some reason. I don't. Right.
I'll continue.
Am I now?
Move on. Move on.
Now, UNESCO has responded to this problem, because it's a problem for UNESCO as well, that culture doesn't have the prominence in the Agenda 2030 statement as it should. And so UNESCO has responded to this by creating cultural indicators for the agenda. And it's in the process of running some case studies on this and developing ideas for incorporating cultural indicators among all the other indicators that are part of the 2030 agenda. And this is just a summary of a large report they've done. And across the bottom, you'll see the logos for the various agenda items on the 2030 agenda. There's 17 or 18 of them. And it shows how cultural indicators, which UNESCO has listed on the top, 22 of them, how they interact with the existing Agenda 2030 indicators. So they're trying to say, look, culture is relevant to right across the board. Now, our interest, and you can see it's got things about culture as part of GDP, and cultural as it interacts with open space and heritage and so on in the environment. Culture as part of knowledge and training and education and so on. So those are the first three sections, but our particular focus is on the last of these, which is inclusion and participation. And they have 5 indicators here: culture for social inclusion, artistic freedom, access to culture, and cultural participation and participatory processes. And we're particularly interested in the access to culture and cultural participation. And that marries up very precisely with the concerns of the World Leisure Organization to promote cultural participation in the community, which, as we indicated earlier, is a human right. And I think at this stage, I'll hand over to Atara to talk about the Charter for Leisure, which is aimed at promoting this idea of cultural participation.
Thanks, Tony. So access to culture and cultural participation. Basically, the World Leisure Charter, the Charter for Leisure, elaborates on these covenant rights. We have the website that is open to the public, where we basically put the charter that was translated to numerous languages as well to make access to as many people as possible. And there's also educational material and material for governments, because things like that cannot be done just by theory, but they definitely need a follow-up action. So to facilitate that, there is educational materials for secondary, higher level students, and of course, materials for governments to monitor and or to actively take part in spreading that. There is a World Leisure and Human Rights group, which Tony and myself are leading, and we are involved in promotion, dissemination, and also some research plan that we will share with you soon. The idea is also to develop links with the UN, like we're doing it now. And this is an open invitation for everybody for becoming members. All you have to do is just to send your name to us. You just go to the website and send your name and we will get you in. There's no entry requirements. It's open to everybody because we want to have as many people as possible involved in this important project. We have a research program holding governments to account on leisure rights, which Tony already hinted. That's 171 nations that sign, but what are they doing as a result of that? And we will talk about it in a few minutes. Let's just get a little bit deeper view on the Charter for Leisure in order to get the idea of how it links to culture and the importance of human rights. There are basically 7 clauses, and those that are highlighted in blue or turquoise, it depends how you see this color, part basically of the covenant, and they are aligning with that because the main idea of this charter was to align it with the international covenant, so it will be together and not something separate with all the background that Tony just prepared. So everybody has the right to adequate time for rest and for the pursuit of leisure activities. For employees, the right to, again, this is aligning with the covenant, reasonable limitation of working hours and periodic holidays with pay. And then the first article is also applying to those engaged in unpaid labor. And everyone has the right to freely participate in the cultural life of the community. As Tony mentioned before, culture has been defined by the UN Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. It includes a lot of aspects, including music, songs, sports, game, cultural, the arts, traditions expressed by individuals and communities, and also the meaning that they give to those things. And these activities depend on the provision of context to that, such as museum, theaters, sports venue, and things like that. So when we say about that, we say that everybody has the right, and there should be a provision for those things to be manifested. Then we move on to the fifth clause that says that leisure is a medium through which other rights and related benefits can be exercised or enjoyed. This has to do with basically either positively or negatively. For example, inclusion versus exclusion. So we have to be very right in putting that through leisure we need to be to exercise those rights, but we all know about the issue of being excluded and also the effort to socially include everyone. Support required from commercial, educational, professional, NGOs, and all government levels are there. This right should be basically applied and supported by all those levels. And government responsibility, we have a long list of things, including providing open space for recreation, natural and cultural heritage, children's play. We all talk about the children's right to play. So here it is. This is the government responsibility in regard to that. To ensure amenities that enhance health, cultural institutions and activities, equity of access, of course, technical and professional training, maybe Tony including training for us to disseminate it in a better way using the all this PowerPoint and etc. Of course, research, leisure as rights in laws, national, regional, local plans, and support for other human rights, which are much basic, such as food, housing, and care. So those are the 7 clauses of the Charter for Leisure. And we will move on now and to Tony to talk about the human rights group, the research project holding governments to account on leisure rights. Tony, you will speak and I will click on so it will be easier. Tony?
Okay. Well, thank you, Atara. Yeah, so this is the Human Rights Group has a draft agenda for research, and it's still forming itself as a group, and so it's very much the first draft. We will be getting together at the World Leisure Congress in December, when hopefully we can meet together as a live group of people, as it were, rather than digitally. And hopefully that agenda will be expanded on. But we're trying to move ahead in advance of that. And so we have one research project which we're trying to promote and get established, which we think is a priority, but it doesn't preclude other research, other very different types of research which we may do. So this first one then is concerned with holding governments to account, and it's really referring to that that system which I talked about earlier, of member governments ratifying the international covenant and reporting. And this, as you can imagine, works through a series of committees, and the core of it is here, where the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights is overseen by the UN Committee for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. That's its responsibility to monitor this this treaty. Periodic reports are submitted by ratifying states every 6 years, as we talked about earlier. This reports on the actual human rights activity and outcomes, that the measures being taken, as well as the outcomes in the member states. Now, also of interest is the fact that there are non-ratifying states, only 25 of them, but some are very small island states with less than 1 million people, and I don't know, but I imagine that the whole process of going through this process might be a commitment which they don't have the resources to enter into. But the question arises: how does this work out in non-ratifying states? Why have they not ratified the covenant? And are their human rights outcomes better or worse than those of countries that have ratified? So there's an interesting research question there. But I think I mentioned earlier that all these reports and comments by the committee and so on are available. And all these things are available online and are material for research. Of course, within each country, that's going to be very variable. The amount of information available, whether there's legislation, whether there's Human Rights Commission, whether there's legislation and plans and strategies for leisure or for recreation or for children's play and so on, all that is going to vary greatly between countries. But they have this common framework of the reports, the UN committee. Now, what we envisage, therefore, in this research is that that every country, 171 countries, and indeed 190, could produce a report or a research study on this process, analyzing it, reviewing it, assessing its success. And that's what our project is aiming to do. And what we will be in the process of doing is devising a kind of common framework for this research, so that there's comparability. Obviously, each one would be different because the countries are different, have different histories and different cultures, but nevertheless some common elements so that the reports and the research can be compared and some cross-national comparisons can be done. And so what we're inviting is participants in this project. At this stage, we don't have any funds, so it's hoped that some academics are able to turn their own personal attention to this as a project, but that doesn't preclude us from actually seeking funds both at the individual and nation level and internationally, and that would be maybe part of the contribution that participants who join the project would be able to work on, about how we get some resources together to do this work, and particularly to bring along the less wealthy countries and so on to enable them to take part in the process. So it's an open invitation, and the follow-up on it can be done, for those interested, can be done via the website, and there'll be details about that later on. So I'll hand back to Atara now to sum up.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Tony. we're going to summarize, but don't leave yet because we have some discussion questions to consolidate and hear your voices as well. So leisure time is part of the right to decent conditions of work in the UN human rights system. Leisure and cultural participations are human rights, and the leisure culture rights are relevant to the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. World Leisure Organization Charter for Leisure seeks to expand on, develop, and promote and disseminate leisure cultural rights. And the last but not least, very important, we extend our invitation to join in our research that we just explained on holding governments to account for leisure rights. So those are the five bullet points to summarize what we say. And we would like to raise 2 discussion questions, and I will just show them here, and then we move back to the Secretariat to facilitate the process. If you were asked to share with your colleagues what you got from this presentation, what would you share about the relationship between work and leisure? And then, if you consider joining our research project on holding governments to account on leisure rights, what else do you wish to know that will affect your decision? So I will stop sharing now and ask Maya from the Secretariat to, okay, good. So here are the questions. Please respond, and then we can go on discussion, Q&A, and everything that is attached to that. Feel free to jot your opinion.
That's our time up, but we've still got time with the session.
Okay.
That was meant to be the end point for the
this is just
PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, this is just an entree to hear your voices. So whoever says leisure has become an official UN mandate. Good. Thank you. Anything more? Well, it's a very early morning in Hong Kong. I started by 5 a.m., so maybe the message didn't go through that well. Okay. And interconnectedness, the wall between work and leisure is breaking down. Great. Thank you. Boundaries and constraints. That we all, even non-leisure folks, can promote and enhance leisure for all. Great. Quite present in the agenda of 2030. Yeah, Rita, thanks. Details about human rights and connections to leisure. As the work hours decreases, it produces more leisure time. Both meet social needs, right? Both relate to self-identity. Right, and feel free to answer the second questions. There's no commitment while you're doing that. And leisure access and the universal design standard agreements should continue to be stressed in the planning and coordinating in public and private leisure space developments. Perfect. Okay. All coming in. Are you interested?
Well, I can answer some of these as we go along.
Yes, we go along.
Yes, the charter definitely talks about all levels of government, and in fact, one of the questions that appear in the research project is that very question. In another presentation we were doing a couple of days ago, we made this point because there was an interest in policy. We said it's an interesting question. Some of the reports that we've already looked at are making interesting statements on behalf of federal governments or national governments, but there's often a yawning gap or an absence of much connection between, for example, states and provinces in federal systems and then local government. And so you have national governments signing up to an international treaty which recognizes the right to leisure, but nothing in local plans which reflect that commitment. So this is something which I think the research will look at.
Okay. People ask about the time. Yes, time is a scarce resource. How much time would be required?
Yes, well,
okay, go ahead.
This is not known, but but it's certainly the case that one approach to this is a kind of modular approach, I think, which is to break it up into sections so that, for instance, obviously there's the international dimension, and that's a fairly enclosed project because those are the documents. There they are on the UN website, and you could do a study or a paper on just that. And then there's the domestic material, and there we might also split it up. For example, you could say we'll do a case study of leisure and people with disabilities, or leisure and gender. So if we break it up into modules, it might be easier to make assessments of how much time and effort is involved. But I'm personally working through a case study of Australia, and what I'm doing as I go along doing it, and I can do it without any paid financial resources because I'm retired, and my superannuation fund is funding this project in the sense of keeping me alive. But nevertheless, in the process of doing a case study myself, in my own time, as it were, I can begin to note down what the tasks are. And what we're working towards is, therefore, setting out a list of tasks which will be suitable for inserting into a grant application. Because you would say we need assistance with X, Y, Z, but we don't have that at the moment. But we're working towards it.
Okay. Well, there's people asking about short and long-term goals. As Tony said, if you talk about measurable outcomes, definitely there's these outcomes that results in publications. About measurable, that has to do with the system that we are basically employing, and the short-term and long-term, this has to do with coming up with a special issue on that, going back to the UN, reporting, and asking for accountability. I will just answer several questions and then let Tony add some more. How people were informed about the issue. Well, we are holding several seminars. It's also on the website. It's only 2 days ago that we had a keynote in the TALS, which is the teaching TALS, TALS, the American group of the Leisure Sciences Academy. And perhaps the use of ChatGPT, yes, I won't say no. It's a very powerful engine. We'll see how people, how we can work. I've actually tried to ask some questions there and got fascinating results. We will use any measure that could elicit this information for us to come up with some publications and advocacy and dissemination. So I've answered several questions in one go, Tony, but maybe you wish to add a little bit more about those. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Atara. Yeah, I mean, you have to go back to that one on the short-term and long-term goals and outcomes. Atara is talking about the academic outcomes. Each of these project reports could stand on their own as so in terms of the academic outcomes, if you like, of the they could stand alone as academic articles. We will probably develop an online publication approach on the World Leisure website, which in a way could be either very short summaries of research or longer reports, which are difficult to get published because of the word limitations in journals. So that's a relatively immediate outcomes. And of course, if you had enough people involved, we might get special editions of journals or possibly books. But of course, there is a long-term goal, which is how we affect the UN process and how we improve the accountability of governments. And the measure of that is an improvement in the content of the reports which governments send to the United Nations. But behind that should be an improvement in levels of cultural participation and enjoyment of leisure and recognition of leisure in the lives of communities around the world. So, that's the long-term goal. And it's, in a way, it's measurable in terms of, in terms of the reports, the measurements should be in the reports. And one of the very initial findings is that part of the guidelines for these reports require states to report on the measures they've taken, the processes they've got in place, their legislation, their regulations, their plans, and so on. What are they doing to support and implement the terms of the covenant? But of course, there's a lot of difference between laying out plans and policies and actually achieving things. And so the big challenge in public policy generally is measuring the outcomes. So how do you know that this has resulted, for example, in improved cultural participation? And the guidelines state that there should be data provided in the reports. And I looked at the European Union countries' reports, was it 27, 28 countries, and only one of them provided data on, for instance, sport participation. And sport is definitely listed as a cultural activity by the UN. And hardly any of them included information on cultural activity, actually data. They said all the things they've been doing, all the measures, all the pilot projects they had us on, but didn't report, even though the reason for choosing to look at the EU is that they have data because it's collected by the European Commission on these very things, but they didn't include it in their reports. So one of the, I don't know whether that's a short-term, medium-term or long-term goal, but all three probably, to just improve the quality of those reports by the national governments. They're just not fully, I don't think they fully reflect the the actual achievements of, for instance, the cultural and leisure communities in achieving these goals or these rights. So it's wide open to setting goals and setting measuring achievements and pursuing them.
Yeah, good. And Maya, can you bring it up a little bit? I can see that some people know the other way. Good, thank you. So yeah, I can see that we already have Mike Nicholas, interested in helping. Great, we put your name there. And somebody wrote on the chat, policy advocate and awareness creation is important. Things that you took out from that, leisure access and universal design standard agreements should continue to be stressed in the planning and coordinating in public and private leisure space developments. Great. So yeah, this is good. And just to remind that we are representing the World Leisure Organization, where the mission is to stress the right for leisure and leisure for all. And we are doing that, and that's part of the project under the special interest group of leisure and human rights. I'll come back to our own presentation, just to see further what we have. So we would like to thank you for that. And we have here is the QR code for the two things, leisure, charter for leisure and a special interest group on leisure and human rights. If you go there, you can definitely find our own details and just write us a note, and we can come back to you and keep you going. We would be happy to see you in other occasions, including the World Leisure Congress in December in New Zealand, where we will have a special session to get people going on this project and the other stuff. I'll leave it for half a minute and then I will stop sharing. And if somebody wants to speak up, we will be very happy to hear your voice. Okay, so let's just try to see that. Okay, I will stop sharing now, and we have everybody online. So whoever wants to speak up in addition to what you wrote, I appreciate your input. Thank you for the coordination of the Secretariat. It's good to see familiar faces again. And I think the floor is open. If you wish to speak, to add something, please say so. Yeah, Peter, good to see you again. Peter, yeah.
Mr. Unmute.
You.
Good to see you too, Atara, and Tony. Yes. Thank you for the session. I just want to raise the issue that I'm working on now, and I mentioned about the wall between work and leisure is actually disappearing rapidly. It started early, pretty much when stress took over the world in many ways, and people are looking for ways to enjoy life. The effect of COVID has stopped people in their tracks for months, where they are really reassessing, and there's plenty of information about how workers are now saying what they want in the workplace, changing the massive resignations going on. People are making their own decisions about their life far more, and they're not really governed by the old principle of, you know, work is the way to salvation and leisure is the work of the devil, sort of. The old, which goes back centuries, of course, but is still very much being practiced in business, which is the reason why this organisation exists, to defend the rights of leisure. But I believe that the arguments against it, and I mentioned the 2030 concept, I think it'll be very different then. I just want to raise that issue. I'm working personally on that in some degree.
Thank you.
Well, if I can respond briefly to that, I agree there's change afoot, and quite a bit has been brought about by the COVID experience, but I also think it's very mixed, and I think a lot of the discussion has been focused on the office worker. And of course, that's an increasingly significant part of the labor force. But we also have to bear in mind, and it's certainly a big divide in this country, the divide between, and in fact, it was geographical in the sense that in Sydney, in the leafy suburbs on the coastal side, was full of office workers who had one set of problems, and then inland, but in the metropolitan area, are all the people that drive trucks and deliveries and work in warehouses and all that sort of thing, and actually had to keep working to keep the country moving, even though they were short of labor because they had sickness as well. So they weren't enjoying working at home because you can't drive a truck from home. Well, they do drive some of the mining trucks from home, but it's a very different experience, and farm workers still have to bring the cows in from the fields and so on. So, and I think it's very mixed and very complex. And in one sense, the stereotype in the past, when people were writing about work and leisure, was a factory worker, and that was wrong, because the factory workers have only ever been less than 50%, even in the most industrialized countries. And yeah, that was a stereotype. But we're now almost moving to the stage where the office worker becomes a stereotype, and everybody's not an office worker. But the other point I would make is this is a sort of debate which we certainly would like to see as part of the work of the leisure of the group, and part of the research agenda, could be, for example, the changing nature of work and leisure, and how does that feed back into the issue of rights? Because the original Commission for Human Rights in the 1940s, I think it was remarkable that in the conditions at the time, in the shadows of the Second World War, they saw fit to include leisure. I mean, it's remarkable, and we have a duty almost to respond to that and welcome that invitation to be part of this system. But they didn't define leisure. They no doubt had some notions of it, and if they had defined it, then they would have defined it in the terms suitable for the 1940s. So we certainly have to keep ahead of that game, but we also have to engage in that very elementary thing that's in the human rights as they stand at the moment, which is the availability of time in whatever form it comes, fragmented or in blocks or whatever, and the ability or the opportunity to take part in activity, and that is cultural activity, and in the life of the community. The word community is there as well. And we need at least to engage with those rights as they currently have been set out, as well as looking ahead to how they might develop in the future.
So I'll just add, there's a big shift going on, and it's dramatically changing and will continue to change over the next, certainly between now and 2030. And we need to be aware of what's going on there. And it's to our advantage.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Good to hear your voice again.
And yours too, so Tara.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I can see people from all around the world. So anybody has something to say about their own context, or feel free. We still have, I think, 5 more minutes, Christina, something like that, right? Yeah, okay. We don't want to say the last word. We just want to say thank you, and hope that we will meet you soon again, and definitely open our arms and heart for you to join our special interest group. We are, I've been working with Tony around the clock. Lucky we are more or less in the same time zone to prepare for this and several other presentations, because we do believe wholeheartedly in this important element of human rights. 2 days ago, we did a presentation to the American context, where they call it social justice, and basically indicated to them that social justice and human rights are complementary. They're in the same case. People talk about women rights and children rights and minority rights. And I deal personally with some NGO dealing people with special needs. So we need the social inclusion. We need these things, and it's all under the umbrella of human rights. And of course, this is the mission of World Leisure Organization, Leisure for All, and we are just to carry it up and to have some results, hopefully research, and of course, practical implication in terms of moving advocacy to action. And Peter, whether in this generation or the next generation, I don't know, but we will definitely make create these foundations for this trend to move on. Right. So, any more comments? If not, Christina, I hand it over to you to consolidate or whatever.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Atara, Anthony, for your presentation, for sharing all this information that is really useful for the leisure community. Thank you so much, all the participants. For some of you, I know it's very late. For others, it's very early. So thank you so much for your efforts and for your participation in the panel. We have already recorded the webinar, and we will share it in our website for those who have attended the webinar and those ones that might be interested in watching afterwards. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good day or a good night. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.